Welcome back to the True Crime Lounge podcast. This season, on season 4, we are discussing Alabama murderers, and it's going to take us all the way back to the year 1963. Um, you're probably wondering, what is she talking about? But before I dive into that, I just want to go ahead and get a few things out of the way. I do have a Patreon that you can join for early access to episodes scheduled to come out. I also have a merch shop for all your true crime gear as well. For any updates on my channel or podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. This episode is set to come out June 18th. But if you're watching this on Patreon, then you can already watch. Then the episode's already on here. Um, so with that being said, let's dive into today's episode. We are on episode 8. We're almost done with the season. I'm excited though. I've got a bunch of projects lined up after this season, so I've been working periodically, but I'm not going to be doing as much this summer because, one, I really want to enjoy this summer. It's my second summer living in Tennessee. I'm not looking for a job this summer. So, well, I'm always looking, but still. Um, but I'm not like actively looking at this point. But with that being said, I just want to go ahead and clarify that because if you're looking, like, this is a pre recorded episode. So, 1963 was a very interesting year for the US, right? It was before my time, but we all know what happened that year. Probably the most known was the JFK assassination. There was the Woolworth sit-in. There was the Clyde Keener Freedom and Death. There was also the Church Street bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, which leads us to today's episode as we talk about Bobby Frank Cherry. Um, for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, the Church Street bombing would occur September 15th, 1963, on a quiet Sunday morning around 10:24 in the city of Birmingham, Alabama. A dynamite bomb would explode in the back stairwell of a downtown 16th Street church, and the blast would rip through the wall and kill 4 African American girls on the other side and injure more than 20 inside the church. Excuse me. This was clear that it was an act of racial hatred and that the church was a key civil rights meeting place and it was a frequent target for bomb threats. The Birmingham FBI office would launch an immediate investigation and wire the FBI director from the crime. Bomb experts would race to the scene via military jet along with additional dozen personnel from other offices that were sent to assist Birmingham. Around 9 p.m. that night, Assistant Director Al Rosen assured the Assistant General Attorney General Katzenberg that the borough considered the most heinous crimes. We had entered the investigation with no holds barred. And it would be backed up, and dozens of FBI agents would work throughout September and October that year, as many as a 36 point. And everything. So, in one memo I've found, it said that they practically turned Birmingham apart and interviewed thousands of people. They've seriously disrupted Klan activities and by pressure and interviews so that these organizations would have lost members in support. Because you gotta remember, at this time, this was really still high in the racial inequality for sure, and still racism was still very blatantly obvious. So it's not, but yeah. So by 1965, there has been serious suspects: Robert E. Chambliss, Bobby Frank Cherry, Herman Frank Cash, and Thomas E. Blanton Jr. All, would you like to guess what they were all members of? That's right, the KKK. But witnesses were reluctant to talk about the physical evidence that was lacking. Also, at the time, information from the surveillances were not admissible during court. As a result, no federal charges were filed in the 60s. It has been claimed that the director Hoover held back evidence from the prosecutors in the 60s and tried to block prosecution, but that was simply not true. His concern was to prevent leaks and to stifle justice. In one memo to the prosecutor, the department prosecutor seeking information, he wrote, "Haven't these reports already been furnished to the department?" So in 1966, Hoover overruled his staff and made transcripts of the wiretapes have available, and he couldn't have blocked the prosecution, and he simply didn't have the evidence to there to convict. Now, Shameless received life in prison in 1977, following a case led by Alabama Attorney General Robert Baxley, and eventually the fear, prejudice, and reluctance that kept the witnesses from coming forward to begin to decide. They also reopened the case in the mid 1990s, and Blayton and Cherry were indicted in May of 2000. Both were convicted at trial and sentenced to life in prison. The fourth man, Harmon Frank Cash, died in 1994. Now, if any of you are interested in learning more about the case, there is actually 3,400 pages of this case that called the Bat Bomb investigation. And here's the thing: we don't have. I could go on, but I it's just honestly one of those things where I don't have the time. We really don't. And I know you don't want to hear me talk that long. But Bobby Frank Cherry was born June 20th, 1930 in Mineral Springs, a neighborhood in Clayton, Alabama. He was born on the same day as Thomas Edwin Blayton Jr., but 8 years earlier. He joined the Marines as when he was in his youth, and he gained he gains expertise in demolitions and working with themselves. At this time, when the Marines, Cherry worked a series of low-paying jobs, including a long stint as a truck driver. Now, Cherry had a wife, Virginia, at the time of the bombing. He and Virginia had 7 children together. The marriage was tumultuous, to say the least. And Bobby Cherry expected deference from his wife, using beatings to enforce his authority. Virginia died of cancer in 1968, and after her death, Bobby placed the children at Gateway Mercy Home Orphanage with relatives. He eventually remarried 4 times, including a third wife, Willadine Virgin, and she later testified at his trial that he had bragged about his role in the church bombings. Cherry left Birmingham in 1970 and moved to the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. He found work as a welder and owned a carpet cleaning business in Grand Prairie. In 1988, Cherry um, suffered a heart attack and moved again, and this time to a town in Henderson County, Texas, with now his fifth wife. That's right, fifth, Myrtle. And during his trial, the prosecution presented evidence that Cherry, a white man, had assaulted a black minister, Fred Shuttlesworth, in 1957 using a brass set of knuckles. And the minister had been working to integrate a school in Birmingham. Now it's no secret that Alabama is literally like a whole state that's racially inclined. Like this was the heart. You gotta remember that Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. This is the South. Um, but the prosecutions also discussed the incident in which Cherry had allegedly pistol whipped a black man in a restaurant after the man insulted Cherry on the morning of the bombing. Cherry was the son of Cherry was with his son Tom at the Modern Sign Company a few blocks away from the church. The two were silk screening Confederate rebel flags, and Cherry later said that he could clearly hear the sound of the explosion happening nearby and knew something bad had happened. Let's talk about his murder trial now. Cherry was originally supposed to be tried for the same time as fellow defendant Thomas Edward Blanton Jr. Cherry was able to successfully delay trial by claiming that the vascular dementia had impaired his mind and that his health would prevent him from assisting in his own defense. Blanton was convicted and Cherry was eventually felt mentally competent to stand trial, and at his trial he denied his involvement in the bombing as well as his affiliation with the KKK. But he was ultimately found guilty. Now his son, Thomas Frank Cherry, testified that Cherry was a member of the United Klans of America, which was a KKK group, and the relatives testified that he bragged about having to play a role in the bombing. His ex-wife, Willa Dean, I mentioned her earlier, also testified. A third man, Michael Mitchell Barnes, had been an associate of Thomas Edwin Blanton Jr. and Bobby Cherry at the time of the bombing and was recruited with the FBI to act as an informant. He testified in the stand at Cherry's trial about Barnes' involvement with the KKK, which was more socially politically based. Something more plausible in the era of the crime, in that the agents approached him and asked for help. He initially declined, but he shown post-mortem photos of a young girls killed by the bomb. And deeply disturbed, he vomited and he agreed to work with the FBI. So he testified that he would primarily friend Blanton, but if Blanton was a good friend of Cherry, so Cherry would sometimes join them when they went out. Barnes' assistance came in the form of going numerous honky tonks and two men with two largely reel to reel tape recorders in the back of the group's conversation. Um, Barnes took thorough notes at these meetings, and additionally, um, what when there were three of them spoke outside, and the tapes were collected by the FBI during this investigation. They misplaced or archived the rediscovery in 1997. The rediscovery of these tapes ultimately led to the prosecution of both Blanton and Cherry. The recordings preliminarily contained racist sentiments. Most significantly, one recording from the car raised the suspicions of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. In the recording, the men spoke on it with approval. Blanton began to say something that sounded like would implicate him. Now, let's talk about the video for a second. Also presented at Bobby's trial was video of explosives and quantity that he had used with the bombing. The violent and force of the explosion was evident and was designed in a defense suggestion that they claimed that Cherry was not involved. The purpose of the bomb may have been used to scare church congregants and injure them. The prosecutors also showed jury a videotape of a white mob beating civil rights leader Fresh Ellsworth when he showed up to register his children for an all-white Phillips high school. We will also get a conviction at this point. So he is currently at Kilby Correctional Facility. Um, and during his trial, he smiled and looked amused. He could be seen joking with his lawyers and several reporters. Man had no remorse whatsoever. He was convicted on 4 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He attempted to appeal, but in October 2004, the Alabama Supreme Court unanimously upheld the conviction, and the court rejected Cherry's claim that a delay of 37 years between commission of the crime and his indictment in 2000. Um, Cherry would die in Kilby Prison Unit on November 18, 2004, at the age of 74. He is buried in Palm Springs Cemetery in Henderson County, Texas.